Before we name the worst king in English history, we must ask, what makes a king truly bad? Is it war and bloodshed, economic disaster, betrayal of his own people? The crown, heavy with the weight of responsibility, has been worn by many men throughout the ages. Some have borne its weight with grace and wisdom, leading their kingdoms to prosperity and glory. Others have faltered under its pressure, their reigns marred by turmoil, suffering and injustice. Throughout this series we will journey through the annals of English history, examining the lives and legacies of those monarchs who have earned a place among the nation's most reviled rulers. We will delve into the complexities of their reigns, exploring the factors that contributed to their downfall and the lasting impact their actions had on the course of English history. From the battlefield to the halls of power, we will witness the consequences of their decisions, the suffering they inflicted, and the indelible mark they left upon the tapestry of time. Join me as we embark on this captivating exploration of power, ambition, and the human condition. Together we will uncover the stories of those who wore the crown and the legacies they left behind. Some kings failed on the battlefield, others lost the trust of their people, and some were simply terrible rulers. Our journey begins with one of the most infamous names in England's history, King John. John, the youngest son of Henry II, ascended to the throne in 1199. Unlike his more celebrated brother, Richard the Lionheart, John lacked the charisma and military prowess that had endeared Richard to his people. From the outset, John's reign was plagued by suspicion and instability. His very claim to the throne was contested, with some believing his young nephew, Arthur of Brittany, to be the rightful heir. John's ruthless ambition would soon manifest itself in the tragic fate of his nephew. Arthur, a mere boy of 15, disappeared under mysterious circumstances while in John's custody. The whispers of murder, though never definitively proven, cast a dark shadow over John's reign, further eroding the already fragile trust between the king and his subjects. John's reign was not merely marked by whispers of treachery and bloodshed, it was also a period of profound political and social upheaval. John's autocratic tendencies, his insatiable thirst for power, and his blatant disregard for the established customs and laws of the land alienated him from the very people he was meant to rule. The barons, once loyal supporters of the crown, found themselves increasingly at odds with their king. John's exorbitant demands for taxes, levied to fund his lavish lifestyle, and his ill-fated military campaigns were met with growing resistance. The king's justice, often arbitrary and brutal, further fueled the flames of discontent. In 1215, this simmering resentment boiled over. A coalition of powerful barons, their patience exhausted, rose up against their king. They demanded that John acknowledge their rights and liberties, codified in a document that would come to be known as the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta, a landmark document in English history, was a testament to the growing power of the nobility and the limits of royal authority. It established the principle that even the king was not above the law and enshrined certain fundamental rights for all free men. John's forced acceptance of the Magna Carta did little to quell the unrest that gripped the kingdom. The king, seething with resentment, had no intention of honoring the agreement he had signed under duress. He appealed to Pope Innocent III, who, siding with the king, annulled the charter, plunging England into a bitter civil war known as the First Barons' War. The war raged across the English countryside, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. John's forces, though initially successful, were ultimately weakened by the king's own paranoia and cruelty. His reign, once marked by arrogance and ambition, was now characterized by desperation and decline. In the midst of this turmoil, fate dealt John a final, humiliating blow. While marching north to confront the rebellious barons, John's baggage train, laden with the royal treasury, was swallowed by the treacherous quicksands of the Wash, an estuary on the east coast of England. This catastrophic loss, both symbolic and material, further eroded John's already tenuous grip on power. The king, his spirit broken, retreated to Newark Castle, where he succumbed to dysentery on October 19, 1216. John's death, though it brought an end to his tumultuous reign, did not signal an end to the turmoil that had engulfed England. His young son, Henry III, inherited a kingdom still reeling from civil war and burdened by the legacy of his father's misrule. King John's reign serves as a stark reminder of the perils of unchecked power, the importance of justice and the rule of law, and the enduring legacy of one man's tyranny. His name, forever etched in the annals of English history, stands as a cautionary tale, a testament to the destructive potential of a king who placed his own ambition above the welfare of his kingdom and his people. The legacy of King John is a complex tapestry of ambition, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of power, serving as a lesson for future generations. Historians continue to debate the full extent of his impact, but one thing remains clear: his reign left an indelible mark on the history of England. The ruins of his castles and the stories of his deeds echo through the ages, a reminder of the turbulent times that shaped a nation. The Magna Carta, though born of conflict, became a cornerstone of constitutional governance, influencing legal systems around the world. Scholars and legal experts study its clauses, finding in its words the seeds of modern democracy and the rule of law. The principles enshrined in the Magna Carta continue to resonate, reminding us of the enduring struggle for justice and liberty. King John's reign, though fraught with turmoil, ultimately contributed to the shaping of a more just and equitable society. His story, a blend of caution and consequence, remains a powerful narrative in the annals of history. The reign of King John, a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, cruelty, and incompetence, serves as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between power and responsibility. His legacy, forever etched in the annals of English history, reminds us that even in the most established of hierarchies, the seeds of discontent can take root and flourish. As we reflect on the tumultuous events of John's reign, we are left to ponder the enduring impact of his actions and the lessons they impart. The Magna Carta, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness of tyranny, stands as a testament to the enduring human spirit, the unwavering pursuit of justice, and the power of collective action to challenge even the most entrenched structures of authority. The echoes of King John's reign reverberate through the corridors of time, reminding us of the fragility of peace, the importance of safeguarding our freedoms, and the enduring consequences of unchecked power. His story is a cautionary tale urging us to remain vigilant against tyranny in all its forms. The year is 1485. England, weary from decades of conflict, welcomes a new king. His name is Richard, but history will remember him as Richard III, the last king of the House of York. His ascension marked not a dawn of peace, but the continuation of a storm. He inherited a kingdom fractured and bleeding, a legacy of war that cast a long shadow over his reign. Richard was no stranger to power. He was a seasoned warrior, a shrewd politician, but the throne was a different beast altogether. It demanded not just strength, but the trust of the people, a trust that was in short supply. The Wars of the Roses, a brutal power struggle between the Yorks and the Lancasters, had left its mark. The land was scarred, the people divided. As Richard took the throne, he looked out at a kingdom on the brink. The faces of his court were a mixture of wary allies and outright enemies. The common folk, bearing the wounds of war, eyed their new king with suspicion. Richard knew he had to act quickly to assert his authority, to unite a kingdom that had forgotten what it meant to be whole. England in 1485 was a land exhausted. The Wars of the Roses, a generation-long conflict, had ravaged its fields and decimated its nobility. The houses of York and Lancaster, locked in a deadly feud for the throne, had bled the country dry. Richard, a York, had fought bravely for his brother, King Edward IV. But Edward's untimely death brought forth a succession crisis, a storm that Richard found himself at the centre of. The political climate was as volatile as the English weather. The Lancastrian faction, though weakened, still posed a threat, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Richard's own claim to the throne was shaky, disputed by many who saw him as a usurper. The whispers of illegitimacy followed him like a curse, fueled by rumours spread by his enemies. Adding to the turmoil was the question of Edward IV's sons, Richard's nephews. The young princes, declared illegitimate by a dubious council, vanished within the Tower of London, their fate a mystery that fueled whispers of murder and treachery. The disappearance of the princes cast a dark pall over Richard's ascension, making him appear more a tyrant than a rightful king. Within the hallowed halls of the royal court, intrigue festered. The nobility, their loyalties divided, eyed each other with suspicion. Richard, acutely aware of the venomous whispers circulating, knew he was surrounded by enemies, some hidden, some brazen. The court, once a place of grandeur and celebration, became a viper's nest of plots and counterplots. The old families, their lineages stretching back centuries, pledged their fealty with concealed daggers in their hands. They smiled and bowed before their king, but behind their eyes, ambition burned. Richard, a keen observer of human nature, recognized the hunger for power that lurked beneath the surface. Even within his own family, Richard faced treachery. His own brother, the Duke of Clarence, had met a sticky end, drowned in a vat of Malmsey wine. Some whispered at Richard's behest. This dark stain on Richard's past further fueled the doubts of his subjects, painting him as a ruthless and power-hungry king. From the outset, Richard's reign was plagued by a fundamental lack of trust. The people, weary of war and wary of their new king, hesitated to embrace him as their own. The wounds of the past ran deep, and the scars of conflict were slow to heal. Richard, despite his best efforts, struggled to bridge the chasm of suspicion that separated him from his subjects. His every action was scrutinized, every word twisted by his enemies. The rumors of his ruthlessness, fueled by the fate of his nephews, preceded him like a storm cloud. The common folk, burdened by poverty and hardship, saw in Richard the embodiment of their suffering. Richard's attempts to restore order and justice were met with skepticism. His efforts to rebuild the shattered economy were seen as self-serving ploys to consolidate his power. The seeds of doubt sown by his enemies and nurtured by fear took root in the hearts of his people. The day of Richard's coronation dawned bright, the summer sun a stark contrast to the apprehension that hung in the air. The ceremony, held at Westminster Abbey, was a spectacle of splendor, intended to awe the populace and cement Richard's legitimacy as king. Yet, even amidst the pomp and ceremony, a sense of unease prevailed. The crowds that lined the streets were strangely subdued, their cheers lacking the usual fervor. Many averted their eyes as Richard passed, their faces betraying a mixture of fear and resentment. The ghosts of war lingered, casting a long shadow over the festivities. Even within the abbey, as Richard swore his oaths before God, the weight of skepticism was palpable. The nobility, clad in their finery, watched with masked expressions, their thoughts a mystery. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who placed the crown upon Richard's head, did so with a noticeable lack of enthusiasm. Richard III inherited not just a kingdom, but a legacy of bloodshed and betrayal. The House of York, though victorious in the Wars of the Roses, had been built on a foundation of ambition and ruthlessness. Richard, as the last Yorkist king, carried the weight of his family's past on his shoulders. His grandfather, Richard of York, had ignited the conflict that would engulf England for generations. His father, the Duke of York, had been slain in battle, his severed head displayed on a pike by his enemies. These were not ghosts easily laid to rest. Richard's own brother, Edward IV, had seized the throne through force, deposing the Lancastrian king Henry VI. Edward, though a charismatic and popular ruler, had his share of enemies. His reign was marked by periods of violence and instability, a constant reminder of the fragility of peace. Richard's reign was beset by challenges from the outset. Rebellions, fueled by Lancastrian sympathizers and disgruntled nobles, erupted across the realm. Richard, a skilled military commander, met these threats with force, crushing his enemies with ruthless efficiency. Yet each victory seemed to come at a cost. The treasury, depleted by years of war, struggled to support Richard's campaigns. The people, burdened by heavy taxes and weary of conflict, grew increasingly resentful. Beyond the battlefield, Richard faced a different kind of enemy: whispers. Rumors of his cruelty and tyranny spread like wildfire, fueled by his enemies and amplified by fear. The disappearance of his nephews, the princes in the Tower, haunted him, casting a dark stain on his reputation. Was Richard III a victim of fate, dealt a cruel hand by circumstance, or were his misfortunes of his own making? The answer, like most things in history, is complex and nuanced. Richard was undoubtedly a product of his time, a ruthless age where power was often seized and maintained through violence. He was ambitious, cunning, and utterly ruthless when necessary. These qualities, which had served him well on the battlefield, proved to be liabilities in times of peace. His paranoia, fueled by the constant threat of rebellion and betrayal, led him to make enemies of potential allies. Yet it is also true that Richard faced extraordinary challenges. He inherited a kingdom torn apart by war, its treasury empty, its people divided. The shadow of the Wars of the Roses loomed large, and the ghosts of past conflicts refused to be silenced. Richard III's reign, though brief, was a tumultuous period in English history. He ascended to the throne amidst chaos and uncertainty, inheriting a kingdom still reeling from decades of conflict. His every move was scrutinized, his every action questioned. The weight of his family's legacy, the constant threat of rebellion, and the whispers of tyranny that followed him all combined to create an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. Richard fought tirelessly to consolidate his power and unite his kingdom, but his efforts were ultimately in vain. In the end, it was on the battlefield, at the Battle of Bosworth Field, that Richard met his fate. His death at the hands of Henry Tudor marked the end of the Plantagenet dynasty and the beginning of a new era for England. Richard III's reign serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most powerful rulers are not immune to the forces of history. King John's reign had been troubled from the start. From the moment he ascended to the throne, it was clear that his rule would be fraught with challenges. His father, King Henry II, and his brother, Richard the Lionheart, had left behind a legacy that was difficult to live up to. John, however, seemed determined to carve out his own path, one that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. He was a harsh ruler, quick to anger and slow to forgive. His temper was legendary, and his court was often filled with the echoes of his rage. Those who dared to cross him found themselves facing severe consequences, and even his closest advisors walked on eggshells around him. His cruelty and greed made him deeply unpopular with his people. The common folk, who had once looked to the monarchy for protection and justice, now saw only a tyrant who cared little for their well-being. Stories of his ruthless actions spread like wildfire, further tarnishing his reputation. He taxed them mercilessly, confiscated their lands, and even imprisoned his enemies without trial. The weight of his oppressive policies was felt in every corner of the kingdom. Farmers struggled to make ends meet, merchants saw their profits dwindle, and families were torn apart by his relentless pursuit of power and wealth. For years, resentment simmered beneath the surface. Finally, it boiled over. The whispers of discontent grew louder, and secret meetings were held in the dead of night. The people, once fearful and submissive, began to find their courage and voice their grievances. John's constant wars had drained the treasury and weakened England's position on the continent. His military campaigns, often driven by personal vendettas and ambitions, left the kingdom vulnerable and financially crippled. The once mighty English army returned home battered and demoralized, unable to defend the realm from external threats. His barons, once loyal, grew tired of his endless demands and his disregard for their rights. These powerful men, who had supported the crown for generations, now found themselves at odds with their king. Their loyalty was tested time and again, and many began to question whether John was fit to rule. They saw their wealth dwindle and their freedoms erode under his iron fist. The barons, who had once enjoyed a degree of autonomy and respect, were now subjected to the same harsh treatment as the commoners. Their estates were heavily taxed, their privileges revoked, and their voices silenced. In the spring of 1215, a group of powerful barons took a stand. They could no longer sit idly by while their king destroyed the very fabric of their society. United by a common cause, they decided to confront John and demand change. They had tried reasoning with John, presenting him with a charter of liberties they demanded he respect. This document, which would later be known as the Magna Carta, outlined their grievances and proposed solutions. It was a bold move, one that required immense courage and determination, but John, arrogant and stubborn, refused to listen. He saw the charter as an affront to his authority and a challenge to his rule. His pride and hubris blinded him to the growing unrest and the potential consequences of his actions. He dismissed their concerns and threatened them with retribution. His threats only served to deepen the divide between him and his barons. The more he tried to assert his dominance, the more determined they became to resist. This only fueled their anger. The barons, now more united than ever, began to plot their next move. They knew that they could not back down, for the future of the kingdom depended on their resolve. They knew then that more drastic measures were needed. The time for diplomacy had passed, and the barons prepared for a confrontation that would change the course of history. The shadow that had fallen over the kingdom was about to be lifted, but not without a struggle. The rebellious barons, now calling themselves the Army of God and Holy Church, gathered their forces and marched on London. They captured the city with surprising ease, proving the depth of John's unpopularity. The people, far from defending their king, seemed almost to welcome the rebels. Isolated and facing overwhelming opposition, John realized the gravity of his situation. His support had crumbled, his authority was gone, and his enemies were at the gates. He had misjudged the situation entirely, believing himself to be far more secure than he truly was. Trapped and with no escape, King John found himself in a dire situation. His reign had been marked by conflict, both with his own barons and with foreign powers. The barons, fed up with his heavy-handed rule and excessive taxation, had risen in rebellion. They demanded a change, a shift in the balance of power that would limit the king's authority and protect their own rights. John was forced to negotiate with the barons. The tension was palpable, as both sides knew the stakes were incredibly high. The barons were determined to curb the king's power, while John was desperate to maintain his throne and authority. They met at Runnymede, a meadow near Windsor Castle, where they presented him with a document that would change the course of English history, the Magna Carta. This was not just a simple agreement, it was a revolutionary document that sought to redefine the relationship between the king and his subjects. This great charter was more than just a list of grievances. It was a manifesto for a new order. It outlined specific limitations on royal authority and established legal procedures that the king had to follow. It was a fundamental challenge to the king's absolute power. The barons were no longer willing to accept the king's arbitrary decisions and demanded a system where their rights were recognized and protected. It enshrined the principle that even the king was subject to the law and guaranteed certain basic rights to all free men. This was a radical departure from the norm where the king's word had been law. John, deeply reluctant, signed the Magna Carta on June 15, 1215. He had little choice. The pressure from the barons and the threat of continued rebellion left him with no viable alternative. His reign, once seemingly absolute, was now bound by the law he had so long disregarded. The signing of the Magna Carta marked the beginning of a new era, one where the rule of law began to take precedence over the whims of a single ruler. This momentous event laid the groundwork for the development of constitutional governance and the protection of individual rights, principles that continue to resonate to this day. The signing of the Magna Carta was not the end of John's troubles. He had no intention of honoring its terms and immediately began plotting to regain his lost power. He appealed to Pope Innocent III, who declared the Magna Carta void and excommunicated the rebellious barons. Meanwhile, John's enemies multiplied. His own son, Prince Louis of France, joined the rebellion at the invitation of the barons, who were desperate for a strong leader. They offered him the English crown in exchange for his support. John was now facing not only his own barons, but also a French invasion. With his kingdom crumbling around him, John became a shadow of his former self. The once mighty king, accustomed to giving orders, was reduced to a fugitive in his own land. He fled from castle to castle, pursued by the combined forces of the barons and Prince Louis. The final blow came when John lost his treasure. While crossing the Wash, a treacherous bay on the east coast of England, a combination of bad weather and bad luck led to his baggage train being swallowed by the tides. The treasure he had amassed through years of extortion sank beneath the waves, a fitting end to his reign of greed. John, broken in spirit and defeated, died a few months later, not on the battlefield, but in his bed, likely of dysentery. His death left a power vacuum in England. The barons, though victorious, were in a precarious position. They had a tenuous hold on the country, and a French king-in-waiting was camped on their doorstep. In the end, it was John's young son, Henry III, who ascended to the throne. The barons, realizing that a foreign king would be far more difficult to control than a child, rallied around Henry. They drove Louis back to France and ensured the continuation of the English monarchy. John's reign, though short and turbulent, left a lasting impact on England. He is remembered as a tyrant, a symbol of cruelty and misrule. His name is synonymous with treachery and greed, his reign a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power. The Magna Carta, forced upon him by his rebellious barons, became a cornerstone of English law and a symbol of individual liberty. It established the principle that no one, not even the king, is above the law. This document, a testament to John's failures, is his most enduring legacy. History, written by the victors, often paints its villains with broad strokes. John, undoubtedly a flawed ruler, may have been more unfortunate than truly evil. He inherited a kingdom already steeped in conflict and debt thanks to his brother Richard's costly crusades. He faced rebellions, wars, and ultimately betrayal from those he trusted most. His reign was a perfect storm of challenges, and perhaps any king facing such adversity would have faltered. King John's reign serves as a stark reminder that power, when wielded without compassion or wisdom, ultimately destroys itself. His rule, marked by heavy taxation and conflicts with the nobility, led to widespread discontent. The Magna Carta, a direct result of his oppressive policies, stands as a testament to the people's demand for justice and fairness. It was a revolutionary document that limited the king's power and laid the foundation for modern democracy. It also underscores the importance of listening to the voices of the people. For a king who ignores the cries of his subjects risks losing their loyalty and, ultimately, his throne. The barons' rebellion against King John was not just a fight for their rights, but a broader struggle for the common people's voice to be heard. This rebellion was a pivotal moment in history, highlighting the power of collective action and the necessity for rulers to govern with empathy and justice. While history remembers John as a tyrant, it is essential to look beyond the label and understand the complex circumstances that shaped his reign. His conflicts with the church, his failed military campaigns, and his strained relationships with his nobles all contributed to his notorious reputation. Yet these challenges also reflect the turbulent era he lived in, a time of great political and social upheaval. Was he truly the worst king England ever saw, or was he a victim of his own ambition and the turbulent times in which he lived? His ambition, while often leading to disastrous outcomes, also showed his determination to assert his authority and maintain his kingdom's sovereignty. The question of his legacy is complex, as it intertwines his personal flaws with the broader historical context. That is a question that continues to fascinate and challenge historians to this day. The debate over King John's legacy is a reminder of how history is not just a record of events, but a dynamic narrative shaped by perspectives and interpretations. As scholars continue to uncover new evidence and re-evaluate old assumptions, our understanding of King John and his era evolves, offering fresh insights into the complexities of power, leadership, and human nature. The crown, a symbol of power, of legacy, of the weighty responsibility to lead a nation. With power comes responsibility. But King's name seemed determined to make all the wrong choices. His reign became one of war, betrayal, and failure. His judgment faltered, his advisors misled him, and the consequences of his actions rippled outwards, fracturing the very foundations of the kingdom. This is the story of a reign that began with such promise, yet descended into chaos, leaving an indelible scar upon the heart of England. Join us now as we delve into the tumultuous years of King's Name, a period marked by devastating losses, crippling poverty, and the disintegration of trust between a king and his people. The early years of King's Name's reign were dominated by conflict, a seemingly endless series of military campaigns that drained the kingdom's resources and morale. On distant battlefields, English armies clashed with their enemies, each defeat a hammer blow to the nation's pride and security. One such battle, fought on the fields of Name of Battle, saw the English forces utterly routed. Outmaneuvered and outmatched, they were cut down by the enemy, their dreams of victory turning to dust. The consequences of this defeat were profound. Not only did it result in the loss of valuable territory, but it also emboldened King's Name's enemies, who sensed weakness in the heart of the English lion. Another crushing defeat at Name of Battle further compounded the kingdom's woes. Here the English army, weakened by years of constant warfare and poor leadership, was once again vanquished. This time the defeat struck at the very heart of England's defences, leaving the kingdom vulnerable to invasion. These defeats were not merely military setbacks. They were catastrophic blows to the spirit of the English people. The king, who had promised them glory and conquest, had instead delivered only humiliation and fear. The seeds of doubt, sown on blood-soaked battlefields, began to take root. With each defeat, the people grew more disillusioned with their king. The once unwavering belief in his divine right to rule began to waver. The whispers of discontent, at first hesitant and hushed, grew louder, echoing through the halls of power. King's Name, however, seemed oblivious to the growing unrest. Blinded by pride and a misguided belief in his own infallibility, he refused to acknowledge the true cost of his military adventures. Instead, he doubled down on his disastrous policies, driving the kingdom further into the abyss. As the king's military ambitions drained the royal coffers, a new hardship began to grip the people of England: crippling taxation. To fund his endless wars, King's Name levied ever-increasing taxes upon his subjects, squeezing them dry like a farmer wringing out a wet cloth. Every echelon of society, from the wealthy merchants to the humblest farmers, felt the weight of the king's demands. The once thriving marketplaces, now subdued and sparsely populated, stood as a testament to the people's dwindling resources. Farmers, their weathered faces etched with worry, watched helplessly as their meager harvests were carted off to fill the king's coffers. The land, once bountiful and life-giving, now seemed to groan under the weight of its burdens. In the towns and cities, skilled artisans, once proud of their craft, were forced to sell their wares for a pittance just to make ends meet. The clanging of hammers and the whirring of spinning wheels, once the soundtrack to a prosperous kingdom, grew fainter with each passing day. The king's tax collectors, ruthless and unrelenting, became a dreaded sight in every village and town. They moved like shadows, extracting their due with an iron fist, leaving behind a trail of resentment and despair. Families, once accustomed to a simple but comfortable existence, were now forced to make impossible choices. Food became scarce, clothing threadbare, and the warmth of a hearth fire, a luxury many could no longer afford. Children, their bellies empty and eyes wide with fear, became the most poignant victims of the king's insatiable greed. The king, ensconced in his opulent palace, surrounded by sycophants and yes-men, remained oblivious to the suffering he inflicted upon his people. As the kingdom teetered on the brink of ruin, The people's resentment towards their king festered and grew. The whispers of discontent, once easily dismissed, became a chorus of anger that echoed throughout the land. The nobility, once the pillars of the king's reign, found their loyalty tested to the breaking point. Used to the privileges and respect their position afforded them, they found themselves increasingly marginalized, their counsel ignored, their sacrifices unappreciated. The king, suspicious of any potential rivals to his power, began to view his own nobles with distrust. He surrounded himself with flatterers and opportunists, men who would tell him what he wanted to hear, not what he needed to know. One by one he turned on his most trusted advisors, accusing them of treason or incompetence, stripping them of their titles and lands, and replacing them with those he believed more pliable and subservient. Those who dared to question his judgment or offer dissenting opinions found themselves swiftly silenced, their words twisted into acts of defiance, their loyalty called into question. Fear and paranoia became the defining characteristics of the court. The king's actions sent shockwaves through the ranks of the nobility. The message was clear. Loyalty was a one-way street, and any perceived slight, real or imagined, would be met with swift and brutal retribution. Old alliances crumbled, replaced by suspicion and mistrust. The great halls of once noble houses, once alive with the sounds of laughter and lively debate, fell silent, the air thick with tension and unease. Some nobles, their patience exhausted, chose to defy the king openly, raising their banners in rebellion. Others, disillusioned but unwilling to risk their lives in a futile uprising, withdrew their support, retreating to their estates, their silence speaking volumes. The king's betrayal of his own nobles had disastrous consequences. It deprived him of their military strength, their political acumen, and their financial support, leaving him dangerously isolated. The once thriving economy of England, already weakened by years of costly wars and reckless spending, finally buckled under the weight of the king's disastrous policies. The king, lacking any understanding of the delicate mechanisms of trade and commerce, implemented a series of ill-conceived measures that strangled the nation's economic lifeblood. He imposed arbitrary tariffs and trade barriers, disrupting the flow of goods and services both within the kingdom and with its international partners. The bustling ports, once teeming with ships from distant lands, grew eerily quiet, the cries of merchants replaced by the mournful creaking of idle vessels. The king, convinced that the kingdom's wealth lay solely in the accumulation of gold and silver, debased the currency, reducing the silver content in coins. This short-sighted measure led to rampant inflation, as the value of money plummeted, eroding the savings of the wealthy and pushing the poor further into destitution. The prices of essential goods skyrocketed, making it impossible for ordinary people to afford even the most basic necessities. Bread riots erupted in the streets as desperate citizens, driven to the brink by hunger, clashed with the king's soldiers. The king's advisors, those few who possessed even a modicum of economic sense, pleaded with him to reconsider his disastrous course. But their pleas fell on deaf ears. The king, blinded by arrogance and an unshakable belief in his own infallibility, refused to listen. He surrounded himself with yes-men and sycophants, individuals who cared more for their own enrichment than the welfare of the kingdom. Corruption flourished as officials lined their own pockets, siphoning off funds that should have been used to alleviate the suffering of the people. The once prosperous merchant class, the backbone of the kingdom's economy, found themselves caught in a vice. The king's policies made it impossible for them to conduct business profitably, while his tax collectors bled them dry. Many merchants, facing financial ruin, were forced to close their businesses, throwing their employees out of work and further deepening the economic crisis. The king's reign, once filled with such promise, ended in ignominy. His name, once whispered with respect and admiration, became synonymous with failure. his legacy forever tarnished by the suffering he inflicted upon his people. His reign was so bad that even his closest allies began to turn against him. The people were suffering, the nobles were furious, and England was falling apart. Even the worst kings leave behind a legacy. Their reigns, often marked by turmoil and mismanagement, become cautionary tales for future generations. The chronicles of history are filled with stories of rulers whose failures have shaped the course of nations. These kings, despite their shortcomings, have left indelible marks on the annals of time. Their legacies, though often tarnished, serve as reminders of the complexities of leadership and the consequences of power. King's name may have ruled poorly, his decisions leading to widespread discontent and upheaval. His reign was characterized by a series of missteps that plunged the kingdom into chaos. From ill-advised wars to oppressive taxes, his policies alienated both the nobility and the common folk. Yet in the midst of this turmoil, there were moments that hinted at a different path, one where his potential for greatness was overshadowed by his flaws. But did his failures change history for the better? The consequences of his reign were far-reaching, setting the stage for significant reforms and shifts in power. The battles fought and lost under his command reshaped the political landscape, leading to alliances and enmities that would define the future. The maps of the kingdom, redrawn in the wake of his rule, tell a story of transformation and resilience. His failures, though devastating, forced the kingdom to adapt and evolve in ways that might not have been possible under a more competent ruler. In the end, the question remains, how do we measure the impact of a king's reign? Is it through the prosperity and peace they bring, or through the lessons learned from their mistakes? Historians continue to debate the true legacy of King's name, examining the myriad ways his rule influenced the course of history. The documents and chronicles of the time offer a window into the complexities of his reign, revealing a tapestry of ambition, failure, and unintended consequences. Was King's name truly England's worst king? Or is that title a reflection of our own biases and the narratives we choose to believe? Comparing his reign to those of other monarchs, we see a spectrum of leadership styles and outcomes. Some kings are remembered for their triumphs, others for their failures. But each reign, in its own way, contributes to the larger story of the nation. The debates among historians highlight the subjective nature of these judgments, reminding us that history is often written by the victors. Or was he simply a warning of what happens when power is in the wrong hands? His downfall serves as a stark reminder of the perils of unchecked authority and the fragility of power. The images of his dethronement, the broken crown and fallen throne, symbolize the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter. His story is a cautionary tale illustrating the dangers of hubris and the importance of accountability in leadership. When power is in the wrong hands, the consequences can be dire. The power struggles and court intrigues that marked his reign are a testament to the volatility of leadership and the ever-present threat of betrayal. The shadowy figures that lurk in the background of his story remind us that the quest for power is often fraught with danger and deception. In the end, the legacy of King's name is a complex one, filled with lessons about the nature of power, the responsibilities of leadership, and the enduring impact of history. Experts have long debated the intricacies of his reign. Some argue that his failures were a result of the turbulent times he lived in, while others believe they were due to his inherent flaws as a leader. The council meetings and royal courts of the era were rife with tension, as advisors and nobles struggled to influence the king's decisions. Ancient scrolls and documents from the period provide a glimpse into the political machinations that defined his rule. Medieval scholars and modern historians alike have pored over these manuscripts, seeking to understand the true nature of his leadership. Was he a victim of circumstance, or the architect of his own downfall? The analysis of his reign reveals a complex interplay of ambition, incompetence, and external pressures. Each document, each piece of evidence adds another layer to the story, painting a picture of a king who was both a product of his time and a cautionary figure for future generations. The debates continue to this day, with historians and scholars offering differing perspectives on his legacy. Some view him as a tragic figure whose potential was never fully realized. Others see him as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and poor leadership. The medieval courtroom and the king's advisors play a crucial role in these discussions, as their actions and decisions were instrumental in shaping the course of his reign. As we reflect on the legacy of King's name, we are reminded of the enduring impact of history. The medieval castles and ancient artifacts that remain today serve as tangible reminders of a bygone era. Historical reenactments bring to life the events and decisions that defined his reign, allowing us to better understand the complexities of his rule. Through these reflections, we gain a deeper appreciation for the lessons of the past and the ways in which they continue to shape our present and future. In the end, the legacy of King's name is a multifaceted one. It is a story of ambition and failure, of power and its consequences. The historical debates and ancient chronicles offer a window into a time of great upheaval and change. As we continue to study and reflect on his reign, we're reminded of the complexities of leadership and the enduring impact of history. The lessons learned from his rule serve as a guide for future generations, highlighting the importance of accountability, wisdom, and the careful stewardship of power. The rise of the king. Before the fall, King Alden was a revered leader. His early reign was marked by prosperity and peace. The people loved him and his court was filled with loyal nobles. But power can corrupt, and soon King Alden began to change. His decisions became more ruthless and his desire for control grew stronger. This chapter explores the early years of King Alden's reign and the events that led to his eventual downfall. The seeds of rebellion. As King Alden grew more tyrannical, whispers of rebellion began to spread. In the dimly lit chambers of ancient castles, secret meetings took place. Nobles, once loyal to the crown, now conspired against their king. The church, once a staunch ally, began to question its allegiance. Key figures emerged from the shadows. Sir Edric, a noble with a vision of a freer kingdom, rallied others to his cause. Lady Elowen, known for her wisdom and influence, used her connections to forge crucial alliances. And Bishop Cedric, disillusioned by the king's disregard for the divine, lent the church's support to the burgeoning rebellion. Their motivations were varied. Some sought justice, others power, and a few simply the hope of a better future. Together they formed a fragile yet determined coalition. They knew the risk, they knew the cost, but the seeds of rebellion had been sown and there was no turning back. The Magna Carta. One of the most significant events in King Alden's reign was the signing of the Magna Carta. As the rebellion gained momentum, the pressure on King Alden intensified. In the grand halls of the royal palace, the king, surrounded by his advisors, faced an ultimatum. The nobles demanded change, and the Magna Carta was their weapon. This document, crafted in secrecy and born of desperation, aimed to curtail the king's absolute power. It outlined rights and liberties that the king could no longer ignore. The events leading up to the signing were fraught with tension. Sir Edric and Lady Elowen, representing the coalition, presented their demands with unwavering resolve. Bishop Cedric, armed with the church's support, added a divine weight to their cause. King Alden, recognizing the growing storm, knew he had little choice. The kingdom stood on the brink of civil war. The contents of the Magna Carta were revolutionary. It guaranteed protection from unlawful imprisonment, access to swift justice, and limitations on feudal payments to the crown. For the first time, the king's authority was legally challenged. The immediate impact was profound. Nobles felt emboldened, the common folk saw a glimmer of hope, and the church regained a sense of moral high ground. But for King Alden, it was a bitter pill to swallow. His reign, once absolute, was now shackled by the very people he sought to rule. The signing of the Magna Carta marked the beginning of the end for his tyranny. The seeds of rebellion had sprouted, and the kingdom would never be the same again. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the dramatic fall of King Alden. The Church's betrayal. The Church was a powerful entity during King Alden's reign. This chapter explores the relationship between the king and the Church, the reasons for their fallout, and the consequences of the Church's betrayal. In the early years of King Alden's rule, the Church and the Crown shared a delicate alliance. The king relied on the Church's influence to maintain order and legitimize his rule. In return, the Church enjoyed unparalleled privileges and power. However, as King Alden's tyranny grew, so did his desire for absolute control. He began to encroach upon the church's authority, imposing taxes on its vast lands and meddling in ecclesiastical appointments. This overreach did not sit well with the clergy. Bishop Cedric, once a staunch supporter of the king, became the voice of dissent within the church. His sermons began to reflect the growing discontent, subtly criticizing the king's actions. The church, sensing an opportunity, started to distance itself from King Alden. In secret meetings, the clergy plotted their course of action, aligning themselves with the rebellious nobles. The final straw came when King Alden attempted to seize church lands to fund his military campaigns. Enraged, the church excommunicated the king, stripping him of his divine right to rule. This act sent shockwaves throughout the kingdom. The people, already disillusioned with the king, saw the church's betrayal as a divine mandate to rebel. The rebellion gained a new fervor, and King Alden found himself isolated, without the moral and spiritual support he had once taken for granted. The church's betrayal was not just a political move, it was a turning point that sealed the king's fate. With the clergy now openly supporting the rebellion, the kingdom was plunged into chaos. King Alden's downfall was no longer a question of if, but when. Stay tuned as we uncover the final moments of King Alden's reign and the ultimate betrayal that led to his fall. Family feuds, betrayal from within. Even King Alden's own family turned against him. This chapter delves into the personal betrayals, the secret plots, and the letters that revealed the extent of the conspiracy against the king. King Alden's reign was not just marred by external rebellion and the church's betrayal, his very bloodline became tainted with treachery. The king's relentless pursuit of power and control had alienated not just the nobles and the clergy, but also those closest to him, his own family. In the dimly lit corridors of the royal palace, whispers of dissent grew louder. The king's brother, Prince Edmund, a man once loyal to the throne, began to question Alden's increasingly despotic rule. Edmund's concerns were not just political, they were deeply personal. He saw the kingdom he loved being torn apart by his brother's tyranny. Late one night, Edmund received a letter sealed with the insignia of a high-ranking noble. The contents were damning, a detailed account of King Alden's secret dealings and plans to further consolidate his power at the expense of his own kin. The letter also revealed a network of conspirators, including members of the royal family, who were plotting the king's downfall. Unable to turn a blind eye, Edmund confronted his sister, Princess Ilara, who was also named in the letter. Ilara, torn between loyalty to her brother the king and her sense of justice, confessed to her involvement in the plot. She revealed that their cousin, Lord Marcus, was the mastermind behind the conspiracy, aiming to install a more just ruler on the throne. The revelations shook Edmund to his core. He realized that the kingdom's hope for salvation lay in the very betrayal of his own blood. As the days passed, more letters surfaced, each one peeling back the layers of the conspiracy. The royal family's betrayal was not just a political maneuver, it was a desperate attempt to save the kingdom from ruin. The tension within the palace walls reached a boiling point, trust was shattered, and every glance was laced with suspicion. King Alden, oblivious to the storm brewing within his own family, continued his oppressive rule, unaware that his downfall was being orchestrated from within the very heart of his court. Stay tuned as we uncover the final moments of King Alden's reign and the ultimate betrayal that led to his fall. The battles and sieges. The rebellion was not just political, it was also fought on the battlefield. As the kingdom descended into chaos, the clash of swords and the roar of cannons filled the air. This chapter provides a detailed account of the key battles and sieges, the strategies employed, and the outcomes of these confrontations. The first major battle took place at the fields of Arundel. Here the rebel forces, led by Prince Edmund and Lord Marcus, faced King Alden's loyalist army. The rebels, though outnumbered, had the advantage of strategy. Using guerrilla tactics and the element of surprise, they managed to outflank the king's forces, leading to a decisive victory. Next came the siege of Blackstone Castle. This stronghold was crucial for controlling the northern territories. The rebels laid siege for weeks, cutting off supplies and bombarding the castle walls with trebuchets and catapults. The loyalist defenders, though valiant, were eventually starved into submission. The fall of Blackstone marked a turning point in the rebellion, giving the rebels a significant stronghold. The Battle of Silver Lake was perhaps the most brutal confrontation. Both sides suffered heavy casualties as they fought for control of this strategic location. The lake's narrow passes and dense forests made it a deadly arena for combat. In the end, the rebels emerged victorious, but at a great cost. Throughout these battles, the rebels employed a combination of conventional warfare and innovative tactics. They used espionage to gather intelligence, sabotage to weaken the king's supply lines, and propaganda to win the hearts and minds of the common people. Each victory not only weakened King Alden's military might, but also eroded his authority and legitimacy. As the battles raged on, the kingdom itself became a battlefield. Villages were razed, crops were burned, and countless lives were lost. The once prosperous realm was now a land of ruin and despair. Yet, amidst the chaos, the hope for a better future kept the rebels fighting. Stay tuned as we uncover the final moments of King Alden's reign and the ultimate betrayal that led to his fall. The People's Revolt. The common people played a crucial role in the rebellion. As the kingdom was ravaged by war, the seeds of discontent among the populace began to sprout. This chapter explores the reasons behind the people's discontent, their demands for change, and their involvement in the revolt. The common folk had long suffered under King Alden's oppressive rule. Heavy taxes, forced labor, and unjust laws had turned their lives into a daily struggle for survival. The king's focus on maintaining his luxurious lifestyle and expanding his military power only deepened their misery. But the people's discontent was not just about their immediate hardships. They yearned for a voice in the kingdom's affairs, for justice and fairness, and for the chance to build a better future for their children. These aspirations fueled their resolve to join the rebellion. As the battles and sieges raged on, the common people became more than mere spectators. They formed militias, sabotaged supply lines, and provided vital intelligence to the rebel leaders. Their intimate knowledge of the land gave the rebels a strategic advantage, allowing them to outmaneuver the king's forces. One of the most significant moments of the people's involvement was the uprising in the city of Ravenfort. The city's inhabitants, fed up with the heavy-handed rule of the king's appointed governor, rose up in rebellion. They stormed the governor's mansion, seized control of the city, and declared their loyalty to the rebel cause. These acts of defiance were not without risk. The king's retribution was swift and brutal, but the people's courage and determination never wavered. Their sacrifices became a symbol of hope and resilience, inspiring others to join the fight. The People's Revolt was not just a sideshow to the main conflict, it was a driving force that weakened King Alden's grip on power. Their involvement shifted the balance of power, turning the rebellion into a full-scale revolution. It was a testament to the strength and spirit of the common folk who dared to dream of a brighter future. Stay tuned as we uncover the final moments of King Alden's reign and the ultimate betrayal that led to his fall. The Fall of the King. The final chapter recounts the events leading to King Alden's ultimate downfall. It highlights the key moments, the turning points, and the aftermath of the rebellion. The chapter concludes with a reflection on the legacy of King Alden and the lessons learned from his reign. As the rebellion reached its peak, King Alden's grip on power weakened significantly. The once mighty monarch found himself isolated and surrounded by enemies on all fronts. The turning point came when the king's most trusted general defected to the rebel side, taking with him a significant portion of the royal army. This betrayal shattered the king's remaining confidence and left him vulnerable. In a desperate bid to retain control, King Alden resorted to increasingly brutal measures. He ordered mass executions of suspected traitors and imposed martial law throughout the kingdom. These actions only fueled the flames of rebellion as more and more people turned against him. The final blow came when the rebels, now united and stronger than ever, launched a coordinated assault on the royal capital. The city's defenses crumbled under the weight of the attack, and the king's forces were overwhelmed. In a last-ditch effort to save himself, King Alden attempted to flee the capital, but he was captured by the rebels before he could escape. The once proud king was brought before a hastily assembled tribunal where he was found guilty of numerous crimes against his people. Stripped of his crown and royal regalia, King Alden was sentenced to death. His execution marked the end of his tyrannical reign and the beginning of a new era for the kingdom. In the aftermath of the rebellion, the kingdom underwent significant changes. The new leaders implemented reforms to address the injustices that had plagued the realm for so long. The people, now empowered and hopeful, began to rebuild their lives and their communities. The legacy of King Alden serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of justice and fairness. His downfall teaches us that even the mightiest rulers can be brought low by the will of the people. It is a lesson that resonates through the ages and continues to inspire those who seek a better future. Stay tuned as we uncover the final moments of King Alden's reign and the ultimate betrayal that led to his fall. When loyalty turns to betrayal, even kings can fall. Here's the gripping story of how King's Name lost it all. Imagine a kingdom teetering on the edge. King's Name was no longer the ruler but the target. His own nobles, tired of his tyranny, drew up the Magna Carta, forcing his hand. But the betrayal didn't stop there. The church, angered by his defiance, turned its back on him. Even his own blood, relatives and allies, conspired against him. Letters revealing secret plots spread like wildfire, igniting distrust and fear. Standoffs between the king and his enemies became the norm. Tension crackled in the air as medieval battles and sieges painted the land with chaos. The people had enough. They demanded change, and rebellion brewed. Caught in a war of his own making, King's Name watched his kingdom slip through his fingers. This is the story of how everything crumbled. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this epic tale.